All right, so we are going to start our notes over the problems happening in the Middle East. And if you guys are at all up to date with what's been going on in the current events, you know that the Middle East is kind of an area fueled with tension and fueled with problems. So we're going to kind of talk about some of those problems today. The first beginnings of these problems started when the British government issued the Balfour Declaration. And this basically declared that the homeland for the Jews would be in Palestine. And this became known as Zionism. And Zionism was the migration of all of the Jews, especially after the Holocaust, to Palestine. And many people saw Zionism as kind of a form of European imperialism, since a lot of these Jews had been living in Eastern Europe and Central Europe. People were seeing this as the Europeans coming in and trying to get control in the Middle East. But the Jews saw it as a return to their homeland. And this really, really increased during the Holocaust and whenever there was a lot of tension in Europe after World War II. All right, so in 1948, the British are going to give up their own control of Palestine, and they're going to hand this problem, this tension, over into the UN. And the UN is going to partition the state of Palestine into two separate states. The Jews are going to be given the state of Israel, and the Palestinians are going to be given the Gaza Strip and West Bank. So the Arabs are going to be given this area here in yellow, and the Jews are going to be given the areas in orange. So it's going to be the partition plan by the UN. And as you probably could tell, this is going to become a big problem. A lot because the religion is different. Jews and Arabs do not have the same religion. Most of the Arabs are Muslims or Christians. And they're just going to have a lot of tension over whose land is what. So Israel is going to become a very hot political issue in the Middle East. All right, in 1948, 5 Arab countries are going to reject this state of Israel, and they're going to launch an attack, but they are going to be defeated. But out of this attack, Jordan, the country of Jordan, is going to be able to seize the West Bank, which was once owned by Palestine. Egypt is going to be able to take the Gaza Strip, and Israel is going to be able to take slices from these territories. A lot of the Palestinians at this time are going to flee those areas because they've been taken over and become refugees. Another thing that's going to happen that's going to cause lots of tension is going to be the Suez Crisis. And the Suez Crisis is Egypt is going to nationalize the Suez Canal and close it off to Israel. And this is going to upset the British and the French. Remember, when we talked about the Suez Canal, the British and the French really relied on it to get through as a way to get and make trade easier. And so the British, French, and Israel are going to invade Egypt as a result of this Suez Canal crisis. Another problem that's going to happen is going to be the 6-day war in Israel. Israel is going to be able to defeat its enemies in 6 days. And what they are going to do is they're going to regain the Gaza Strip, which is right here. They are going to be able to get the West Bank back from Jordan, and Golan Heights, which is an area right here, they're going to be able to get that back from Syria. So Israel is going to be able to regain a lot of their territory after the 6-day war. And so it's going to show the land that was Israel and then the land that is regained after the 6-day war. So Israel is going to regain a lot of land. The Yom Kippur War is going to be very influential because it's going to take place on the Jewish holiday of Yom Kippur. And it's Egypt and Syria are going to launch a counterattack basically on Israel on this Jewish holiday to regain some of their land. And Israel is going to be able to repel those forces and keep the Sinai Peninsula from Egypt. So this is going to kind of lead to a lot of tension and a lot of unrest between this land in the Middle East. At the center of all of these problems is going to be the production of oil. You guys know from geography that oil is the #1 export from the Middle East. And in the 1970s, the oil-producing countries known as kind of Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates, all of these Middle Eastern countries that are heavy producers of oil are going to form what is known as OPEC. And it's just the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. And during 1973, in the war with Israel, OPEC is going to use oil as a political weapon. Knowing that other places and other nations are dependent on that foreign oil, they are going to refuse to sell oil with countries with relations with Israel. And the United States happens to be one of those countries. So they are going to restrict the amount of oil that the United States, they're going to refuse to sell oil to the United States. And so it's going to cause lots of problems economically in the U.S. at this time. Because it's going to have a huge impact, this unrest and this fighting in the Middle East is going to have a huge impact on the U.S. President Carter is going to step in and he is going to try to make peace with the Camp David Accords in 1978. Basically, he gets the Egyptian president Anwar al-Sadat and the Israeli prime minister Menachem Begin, and he's going to bring them together at Camp David, which is kind of a presidential retreat, and he is going to help them negotiate peace. And so they are going to eventually sign what is known as the Camp David Accords. Israel is going to return the Sinai Peninsula to Egypt in exchange for peace. Now, this is not going to create peace all together. Now, between the two leaders, yes, but the people back at home are still not going to agree to this peace. So eventually, President Sadat is going to be assassinated by an Arab extremist who did not agree with making peace with Israel. So people are not going to be 100% receptive to this peace. It's really just going to be the leaders coming together. You're still going to have unrest among the groups. All right, so more tension is going to be brewing over. In Palestine, you're going to get the formation of the PLO, which is the Palestinian Liberation Organization. And this is just going to be a group who refuses to back down and refuses to recognize Israel, and they want their land back. They're going to be kind of an extremist organization. And they're going to use terrorism. And we know what terrorism is. It's just basically using fear and acts of violence to make political demands. And one of their most famous acts of terrorism is going to be the attack on the Israeli Olympic team in 1972 at the Munich Olympics in Germany. Palestinian terrorists are going to murder 11 Israeli Olympic athletes as an act of terrorism. And so this terrorism and this tension is going to be very much on the rise during this time, especially between the Palestinians and the Israelis. Through all of this, you're going to have one woman leader who is going to be very influential in Israel. She is going to take power in 1969. Golda Meir, she is the prime minister of Israel. She was born in Russia and she migrated to Israel in 1921, and she becomes the first female prime minister of Israel. And she was in power during the Yom Kippur War and the Munich Olympic attack. So she is there to kind of prove that females could be powerful in a culture where there was lots of tension and strain. So she is another one of our women that we've studied who is going to bring light to women being powerful. All right, so after the formation of the PLO, they are going to be expelled from Jordan and they're going to move on to Lebanon. They are going to seek refuge in Lebanon. And in 1978 and 1982, the Israeli army is going to invade Lebanon to destroy the PLO camps. And at this time, you are going to have what is known as the Intifada, which just means uprising. And young Palestinians are going to begin violent protests against Israel in the Gaza Strip and in West Bank. And Israel's going to try and contain these protests, try to shut them down, but they're not going to have success. So in the meantime, the Jews are going to go in and start building settlements in West Bank and Gaza. And we know that those were once Palestinian territories. So there's just lots of fighting over this land, who owns what and who should settle where. And so eventually, peace is trying to be made. In 1991, the United States is going to pressure Arab and Israeli leaders to make peace. They want them to come back together. And so Israel's new prime minister, Yitzhak Rabin, is going to negotiate with Yasser Arafat, who was a PLO, or Palestinian Liberation Organization leader. And they're going to sign peace accords called the Oslo Accords at the Middle East Peace Conference. This returns the Gaza Strip and West Bank to Palestine. The PLO is going to officially recognize Israel, and Israel is going to re-sign a peace treaty with Jordan. So you're going to have a little bit of hope toward peace and negotiation in this area. However, in 2001, there's going to be a second intifada, and there's going to be more problems leading to this Palestinian uprising. Ariel Sharon is going to attack Arafat's compound in response to some suicide bombings. And Ariel Sharon is the Israeli prime minister in 2001. So he is going to attack a PLO compound in response to suicide bombings in Israel. And in 2002, Israel is going to start constructing the West Bank barrier, which is a wall separating the West Bank that the Palestinians occupy from Israel. And Sharon is going to announce that all Israeli settlements in West Bank and Gaza should be dismantled to achieve peace. So after the second uprising, they're going to try and establish peace in the Middle East and build this wall and try and keep the two groups to be separate. But more tension is going to occur when the PLO divides. You guys have probably heard these names before, but the PLO is going to divide after Yasser Arafat dies. It's going to be split between two groups, the Fatah and the Hamas. And the Fatah is going to be the side that sides with Arafat, and the Hamas is going to be a more radical terrorist organization that comes out of the Palestinian Liberation Organization. And the Hamas are going to have control over Gaza, and the Fatah is going to control the West Bank. So you're going to have even division within the PLO that's causing tension. In 2007, Israel and Palestine are going to agree to negotiate. They agree to settle control of Jerusalem. They agreed to negotiate on the Jewish settlements on West Bank and the rights of the Palestinians who left Israel. And while they are all negotiating, Israel is going to take attacks from Hezbollah, which is another terrorist organization, and Hamas, which we know is a PLO terrorist organization. And so Israel is going to invade southern Lebanon to try and destroy Hezbollah, and the UN is going to pass a resolution to stop the fighting and disband Hezbollah, even though it has not come to any resolution. So currently in the Middle East, kind of where we leave, in 2008, Israel is going to launch airstrikes and send troops to Gaza to try and end attacks there. Progress in peace has been very slow. Many world leaders are trying to look towards a solution. They're trying to fix the problems, trying to come up with peace negotiations, but many of these key issues remain unsolved. And as you guys probably know, as you watch the news, there are many unsolved issues going on in the Middle East today. It's just a hotbed of tension, and it's got many problems that have gone unsolved. But these are just some of the roots of the problem and some of the things that have gone into place of why the Arabs and the Palestinians cannot get along. I'm sorry, the Israelis and the Palestinians cannot get along.